It starts as the smallest thought. So small you almost don't notice it. So quiet you almost don't hear it. Just a whisper in the back of your mind while you're doing something ordinary. Making tea. Staring out a window. Folding the same shirt twice because your mind wandered. Maybe it wasn't my fault. You freeze. Because that thought feels dangerous. Foreign. Almost like a betrayal. Of what? You're not sure. But it feels wrong to think it. Because for so long, everything was your fault. The arguments. Your fault for being too sensitive. The silent treatment. Your fault for saying the wrong thing. His anger. Your fault for provoking him. His unhappiness. Your fault for not being enough. You absorbed it all. Every accusation. Every criticism. Every time he looked at you with that expression that said you were the problem. You took it in. You believed it. You carried it like stones in your pockets until you forgot what it felt like to move freely. You apologized for things you didn't do. You apologized for things that were done to you. You apologized for having needs, for having feelings, for existing in a way that wasn't convenient for him. And somewhere in all that apologizing, you became convinced. The problem was you. If you could just be better, calmer, more understanding, less needy, less emotional, less you, then everything would be okay. But it never was, because the target kept moving. One day he wanted you confident. The next day your confidence was arrogance. One day he wanted you independent. The next day your independence was abandonment. One day he loved your passion. The next day your passion was drama. You couldn't win, but you kept trying, because you believed the lie he told you, that you were the chaos. You were the problem. You were the reason nothing worked. And now, in this quiet moment, this tiny thought, maybe it wasn't my fault. You sit with it, carefully, like it might shatter, or like you might. You think about the time you tried to express how you felt, and he turned it into an interrogation of your character. That wasn't communication. That was punishment. You think about the time you accomplished something, and instead of celebrating with you, he found a way to diminish it. That wasn't humility. That was control. You think about the time you set a boundary, and he made you feel selfish for having one. That wasn't compromise. That was manipulation. You think about all the times you said something hurt you, and he made it about how you hurt him by saying you were hurt. That wasn't accountability. That was deflection. The whisper gets a little louder. It wasn't your fault. But the resistance is strong, because accepting that means accepting something harder. That you were in a relationship with someone who needed you to be wrong, who needed you to be broken, who needed you to be the problem so he never had to look at himself. It means accepting that no amount of changing yourself would have fixed it, because you were never what needed fixing. It means accepting that all those apologies you gave, all that blame you carried, all those times you tried harder, loved better, made yourself smaller. It was never going to be enough, because enough was never the goal. The goal was to keep you off balance, questioning yourself, focused on your supposed flaws so you wouldn't notice his, so you wouldn't leave, so you wouldn't realize that his love came with conditions that were impossible to meet. The thought comes again, clearer now. It was never your fault. And with it, something breaks. Not you. The illusion. The story you were told so many times you thought it was truth. You weren't too sensitive. You were having normal reactions to abnormal treatment. You weren't too needy. You were asking for basic respect and affection in a relationship. You weren't too much. You were just more than he could handle without trying to shrink you. The tears come, not because you're sad, but because you're finally seeing it. The weight you've been carrying that was never yours to carry. The blame that belonged to someone else. The fault line that ran through him, not you. This doesn't mean you were perfect. You made mistakes. You said things you regret. You weren't your best self in that relationship. But here's what you're finally understanding. You weren't your best self because you couldn't be. Not there. Not with him. Not in an environment where your best self was a threat. You reacted. You defended. You survived. And survival isn't pretty. It's messy and desperate and sometimes ugly. But it's not your fault that you had to survive a relationship that should have been safe. The whisper becomes a voice. It was never your fault. Say it, out loud, even if your voice shakes, even if you don't fully believe it yet. It was not my fault. Say it again. It was not my fault. Let it sink in. Let it reach the places inside you that have been twisted into believing you are unlovable, impossible, wrong. You are not unlovable. You are just loving someone incapable of loving you back in a healthy way. You are not impossible. You were just in an impossible situation. You are not wrong. You were just told you were by someone who couldn't admit when he was. This realization doesn't fix everything. You'll still have hard days. You'll still doubt. You'll still carry the aftermath of what happened. Healing isn't linear. But this thought, this quiet, powerful thought, it's the beginning of releasing what was never yours, the beginning of forgiving yourself for staying, the beginning of understanding that his inability to love you properly says everything about him and nothing about your worth. You are not at fault for what happened to you. You never were. If you needed to hear this today, it found you for a reason. Subscribe to keep walking toward healing. You deserve every step forward.